Rain streaked the tall windows of the Midtown Cafe as Emma Reyes stirred her untouched coffee. The noise outside blurred into a soft hum, muffled by the walls of polished marble and leather booths. She sat alone, shoulders tight under a borrowed coat, her eyes fixed on the time glowing from her phone. She was 5 minutes early, but he was already late. Then the door opened. A man stepped in, tall and unmistakably composed despite his age. His hair was snow white, neatly combed back, and he carried a cane carved from dark wood. The staff greeted him with respectful nods. He walked toward her without hesitation. "Emma Reyes?" he asked. She nodded, standing halfway, uncertain whether to offer her hand. He extended his instead. His grip was steady, firm. "I am Charles Whitmore," he said simply and sat across from her. Emma swallowed. The name hit her like a gust of wind. Everyone in Manhattan knew Charles Whitmore. He built the Whitmore Plaza, half the financial district, and once ran for mayor. And yet, she had never expected to meet him face to face. "I am sorry," she said slowly, "but I don't understand why I'm here." Charles studied her face for a moment. Then he pulled a folded paper from his coat and slid it across the table. She glanced down. It was a credit reporter's. The numbers stabbed at her like tiny knives. "You are in debt," he said plainly. $142,000. School loans, credit cards, and a private loan you used to pay your mother's hospital bills. Emma's face flushed. "How did you get this?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said, "I have a solution. Marry me." Emma blinked. "What?" "Marry me. For 1 year. This is not about love or romance. It is a business arrangement. I will pay off all your debts. You will live with me, attend public events as my wife, and in return I will gain stability." She stared at him, baffled. "You want a trophy wife?" "No," he said. "I want a legacy." The silence between them stretched. Emma glanced out the window, watched the rain fall harder. Her breath fogged the glass. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you were young, smart, alone, and desperate enough to say yes." The courthouse was cold that morning, its fluorescent lights washing everything in pale gray. Emma sat still on the wooden bench, the heels of her shoes just brushing the floor. The clerk called their names without ceremony, and Charles offered his arm with the air of a man signing documents, not wedding vows. Their witnesses were strangers, Charles's lawyer and an older woman from the court's staff. No bouquet, no music. Just the muted sound of pens against paper and the quiet echo of the judge's voice as he pronounced them husband and wife. Emma nodded politely when Charles looked at her. He smiled faintly. She could not tell if it was reassurance or triumph. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, and a car waited at the curb, sleek and black with tinted windows. She followed him into the back seat, unsure whether she felt like a bride or a transaction. The drive was long. The city faded behind them, replaced by winding roads that twisted through bare trees and silent estates. When they reached the Whitmore property, dusk had already crept across the sky. The mansion sat at the top of a small hill, its stone facade streaked with moss. It looked timeless, untouched, as though no one had lived there for years. Thick vines clung to the sides, and the windows reflected only shadows. The butler, Mr. Lane, opened the door with a quiet nod. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and age. "Your room is this way," Charles said, and began to walk. His cane tapped softly against the marble floor. Emma followed him up the wide staircase, past paintings she didn't recognize as portraits of men and women with pale eyes and solemn mouths. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, and the house felt oddly silent, as though it had been holding its breath for years. He stopped in front of a tall wooden door and pushed it open. The room was large and elegant. Ivory curtains, a carved four-poster bed, a reading chair by the window. But something about it felt untouched, as if no one had lived in it, as if no one ever should. "You may decorate it however you like," Charles said, not entering. "Dinner is at 7. It is formal." He walked away before she could reply. Emma sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely gave beneath her weight. Outside the window, the sky had darkened to steel, and the wind stirred the trees in a slow, uneasy rhythm. She did not cry. She only sat there, her hands resting in her lap, her wedding ring cool and unfamiliar on her finger. Days passed in the mansion like fog rolling over water, soft, slow, difficult to measure. Emma moved through the halls with quiet steps, learning their rhythm, listening to the house as it breathed around her. Charles was cordial but distant. They had breakfast in near silence, lunch separately, and dinner together at the long dining table beneath a crystal chandelier that gave off a pale, blue-tinted light. He spoke of stock markets, land holdings, the changes in commercial real estate. She answered when asked, but rarely volunteered more. The staff silent and few drifted past like ghosts. Mr. Lane, the butler, a cook named Marion, and a woman called Elsie who handled laundry. None of them spoke unless addressed. Their movements were exact, their eyes lowered. But Emma noticed something strange. Doors. There were many of them. Heavy oak doors with brass handles. Some opened to empty rooms, dusty studies, shuttered salons, guest suites long abandoned. But others were locked. Always locked. She had tried once, gently, as she walked the eastern corridor alone. Her fingers closed around the cold brass of a door handle and turned. It didn't move. She tried again firmly this time, but it remained unmoved. She thought little of it then. But as the days drifted by, she began to sense the locked doors more than see them, like hidden things, like secrets that breathed behind the wood. Late one night, as she walked past one such door on the 3rd floor, she paused. The air around it was different, cooler somehow. Still. And as she turned to leave, she heard it. A whisper. Too faint to catch the words. It could have been the wind, or the shifting of the house, but it made the hair rise on her arms. She leaned closer, held her breath. Nothing. The next morning, over coffee, she asked Charles about the closed rooms. His spoon paused in his teacup. Then he stirred again. This house is old. Most of it is unused. You only need the spaces we live in. Let the rest be. His voice was calm, but there was something final in it. Something like a warning, lightly dusted in civility. Emma nodded. But her thoughts continued to circle that hallway, that whisper, that strange stillness pressing against her skin. One evening, while Charles was away at a board meeting in the city, she wandered the library. The room was vast, with shelves that stretched to the ceiling and a balcony lined with iron railings. Most of the books were older than she was, leather-bound, faded titles, some in languages she couldn't read. She found a small writing desk tucked near the window. The drawer was unlocked. Inside lay a handful of yellowing letters, a black fountain pen, and a tarnished brass key. It was small, ornate, the edges curled in a delicate pattern like ivy. She held it in her palm. It felt heavier than expected. She stood there for a long time, the key growing warm in her hand. Outside the window, the sky was slipping into indigo. The wind pressed against the glass in long, low sighs. She closed the drawer, slipped the key into her pocket, and turned to leave. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked gently on its hinges. Emma paused. The house was speaking again. Emma waited until the house had gone to sleep. The sound of footsteps from the hall faded hours ago. Her own room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp, casting soft shadows along the edge of the wardrobe. She sat on the edge of the bed in silence, listening. The key lay on her palm, still warm from the touch of her skin. When she finally rose, the floorboards creaked gently beneath her feet. She made her way to the eastern corridor. The hallway was darker than she remembered. The curtains had been drawn across the windows, and the silence was thick. Her footsteps were light, careful. A distant grandfather clock echoed the hour. Midnight. She stopped at the door. The one that had not opened. The one where she had heard something unspoken and nearly forgotten. Her fingers hovered over the handle. Then she reached into her pocket and took out the key. It slid in easily, turned with a soft click. The door creaked open. The air on the other side was still and cool. The room was large, but not grand, simple. The wallpaper had faded into gray-blue patterns. A writing desk stood by the window, and beside it, an old leather armchair. There was a faint scent of lavender and something older books perhaps, or dust that had not been disturbed for years. On the far wall hung a collection of photographs. She stepped closer. They were black and white, mounted in thin silver frames. The same man appeared again and again, tall, sharp-jawed, with eyes that reminded her of Charles, but younger. And always beside him, the same woman. Her hair was dark, her face elegant in a quiet way. Not beautiful in the way magazines defined it, but graceful. Her gaze lingered in every image, thoughtful, steady, Emma leaned closer. Beneath one of the photos was a small brass plate. Margaret Whitmore, 1948 to 2009. Charles's wife. His late wife. On the desk, beside a stack of books, lay a worn leather journal. Emma hesitated. Then, carefully, she opened it. The handwriting was delicate, looping, feminine. The first entry was dated 15 years ago. The doctor says there is no hope. I have not told Charles. He is building again more towers, more hotels, but he does not see me anymore. Emma turned a few pages. I hear voices at night, not in the halls. In my own mind, the silence in this house is too loud. He says he built this house for us. But I think he built it to bury something. Maybe himself. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the book. She read more. He keeps the locked doors as they were. He walks past them like tombs. Sometimes I wonder if I am the ghost here. The last entry was dated just months before Margaret's death. I am not afraid to go. I am already gone in most ways. But if someone finds this, if someone reads these words, please ask him why. Ask him why he could never let anything go. Emma stared at the page for a long time. A creak behind her made her jump. She turned. The hallway was empty, but the door was no longer open. It was shut behind her. Emma stood very still. The door was shut, but not locked. Still, something about the way it had closed silently deliberately sent a ripple down her spine. She opened it slowly and stepped back into the hall, the leather-bound journal still in her hands. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window in her room, wrapped in a blanket, the journal on her lap. The mansion beyond the glass lay still and breathless. Somewhere deep in the house, she thought she heard the soft thud of a door, the rustle of fabric, but nothing ever followed. In the morning, she found Charles in the garden. He was tending the roses bare-armed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. It was the first time she had seen him without a tie. His movements were slow, deliberate. The shears gleamed in his hand. She approached quietly. I went into the locked room, she said. He didn't look up. I see. It was hers, wasn't it? Margaret's room? He nodded once, snipped a dead blossom and let it fall. I read her journal. A pause. And what did it tell you? That she was alone. That she was afraid. Charles finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not angry, only tired. I never intended to shut her out, he said. But I was building empires. For her, for us. You were building walls, Emma said softly. He didn't answer. They stood in silence for a while, the wind moving gently through the hedges. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns along the stone path. Emma looked down at the rosebush he had just trimmed. It was almost bare, its flowers wilted before bloom. Why did you ask me to marry you? She asked. Charles wiped his hands with a handkerchief. Because I thought I needed someone beside me, someone to stand in the light while I faded quietly into the dark. You needed a replacement. He did not deny it. And what am I to you now? She asked. His gaze lingered on her, something complex moving behind his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or something older. I don't know, he said. You are not what I expected. Emma walked away without another word. That afternoon, she returned to Margaret's room. She sat in the armchair beside the window and read the journal again from the beginning. Not for answers this time, but for Margaret, the woman who had lived in a house filled with silence and echoes, who had loved a man made of stone and shadow, who had never asked for revenge, only for someone to ask why. And that night, as Emma stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, she realized something had shifted. She was no longer here just to escape debt. She was here to understand the story no one else had ever told. Rain returned that evening, a steady hush against the windows. The house responded the way it always did, by retreating into itself. The lights dimmed, the halls grew long and still, and the silence folded inward like heavy fabric. Emma wandered the gallery hall on the second floor. The corridor was lined with portraits, stern ancestors in oil and gold leaf, family faces frozen in expressions too formal to remember. She had walked past them a dozen times without looking closely, but now she stopped. A painting caught her eye not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. It was smaller than the others. Its frame darker, less ornate, it hung slightly askew. The subject was Margaret again, but younger, standing in the garden in a pale blue dress, one hand resting on the back of a wooden bench. Her eyes seemed to look past the painter, not quite meeting the viewer. Emma reached for the frame to adjust it. It lifted more easily than expected. As she tilted it forward, something shifted behind the canvas, a soft soundpaper sliding against wood. Her fingers moved around the back. There, tucked between the canvas and the backing, was a letter. The envelope was brittle with age, the edges yellowed. On the front, in a careful hand, was written, "To the one who finds this." Emma hesitated, then broke the seal. The letter inside was short. "If you are reading this, you must be someone who sees the things Charles does not. I do not write this out of anger, but out of hope that someone might understand what was never spoken aloud. This house is full of mirrors. He built it to reflect himself, but never looked long enough to see what stared back. I tried to stay. I tried to love the man who returned from building towers, but the man who came back was not the one I married. I knew about her. The woman before me, the first wife, the one he never spoke of, she, too, disappeared into the silence." Emma froze. She read the line again. She, too, disappeared into the silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. She had never heard of another wife. Charles had never mentioned anyone before Margaret. And yet, it explained something. The way the staff avoided the West Wing, the way Charles moved through certain rooms without a glance, as if memory lived there and he refused to wake it. Emma slipped the letter into her coat and returned to her room, the hallways darker now, the portraits watching with quiet intensity. That night, she dreamed of a locked door she had never seen, one made of glass, covered in ivy, with light pouring from beneath. In the dream, she reached for it, and someone on the other side reached back. The dream lingered well into morning. Emma awoke with a chill across her shoulders, her breath fogging slightly in the cool air of her room. The mansion was quiet, but not peacefully suave was the silence of a place holding something back. She dressed and moved through the halls with purpose. Her steps led her to the old office on the ground floor. It was a room she had passed many times, its door always left slightly ajar, its heavy curtains drawn closed. She had never seen Charles use it. Inside, the furniture was older than in the rest of the house. The desk was wide, mahogany, with thick legs and tarnished brass handles. She opened the top drawer and found nothing but blank paper and a sealed ink bottle. Then she noticed a drawer beneath, almost hidden. It had no handle, just a slight groove. She pulled gently. It opened with a faint scrape. Inside lay a thick leather-bound ledger. The paper inside was dense, cream-colored, filled with narrow handwriting in faded ink. It appeared to be a personal financial record, dates, investments, transfers. She flipped through it aimlessly until something caught her eye. A name! Written carefully, dated over 40 years ago. Clara B. Whitmore. Her breath caught. Another Whitmore? She checked the date again. The entry was from 1979, 3 decades before Margaret. Emma scanned the lines. A trust fund established. A property transferred. Then suddenly, the entries stopped. The name disappeared from the pages. No explanation. No footnote. Emma searched the next 20 pages. Nothing. It was as if Clara had been written out of existence. Her hands turned the pages faster now, the soft rustle of paper sharp in the still room. Then one final entry in the margin, squeezed into a corner in smaller handwriting. Gone. No forwarding address. All inquiries to cease. Emma sat back, her pulse loud in her ears. Gone. The word carried a weight that didn't feel administrative. It felt final, buried. She closed the ledger and sat for a long time, the dust motes spinning in the slanting morning light. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but they didn't lead to safety. They led to something else. When Charles returned that evening, Emma was waiting in the sitting room. "You were married before Margaret," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Charles paused in the doorway. For the first time since she'd met him, he seemed surprised. "Where did you find that name?" "In the ledger, and in the silence." He walked slowly into the room and lowered himself into the chair across from her. The light from the fireplace caught in his silver hair, but his face was in shadow. "I was very young," he said. "She was ill. The doctors thought she would recover. They were wrong." What happened to her? He looked at her then. Not coldly, not cruelly, just far away. She left, in pieces. Emma said nothing. Clara was kind, Charles continued, but fragile. This house wasn't built for her. I wasn't either. When she died, I erased her. I thought I was protecting something. Maybe my own shame. And Margaret? He nodded. She knew, but she stayed, until she couldn't anymore. The room filled with the sound of the fire. Emma felt the weight of the ledger in her memory. You chose me for a reason, she said. Charles didn't deny it. Did I remind you of them? No, he said. You reminded me of someone who might finish the story. Emma stood slowly. I think I already have. The sun returned after 3 days of rain. Light streamed through the high windows of the conservatory, falling across the tiles in long gold bands. The garden outside had come alive again. Leaves glistened, petals opened, and for the first time since she arrived, Emma heard birdsong. She sat alone at the table by the glass doors. The letter from Margaret was in front of her. So was the ledger, the journal, all of it. Charles stood quietly across the room, hands clasped behind his back. You brought me here for closure, she said softly, but I think you wanted something more. He didn't reply. You wanted a witness. Charles stepped forward slowly. His footsteps were steady, but his face betrayed the weight of years. I thought, he said, that if someone kind enough could see the worst of me and stay, then maybe I hadn't failed entirely. Emma looked up at him. He no longer seemed like a legend. He looked like a man whose empire had turned to glass. I cannot stay here, she said, not because I hate you, but because I refuse to become another voice in these walls. Charles nodded. A slight motion. No surprise in it. I understand. They sat in silence for a while. No legal threats. No pleas. Just the still, shared knowing that this strange arrangement, this shadow marriage had reached its end. That afternoon, Emma walked through the garden one last time. She passed the fountain, the empty greenhouse, the roses that had begun to bloom again. At the far end of the path, she paused beside a stone bench. The plaque at its base was nearly covered in moss. She bent to read it. Clara B. Whitmore. Remembered. A name no longer erased. She stood for a long time, the wind lifting her hair gently from her shoulders. Then she turned and walked away. Not hurried, not broken, but free. In the weeks that followed, she returned to the city. She sold the jewelry Charles had gifted her, used the money to settle what remained of her debts. Then, in quiet deliberation, she contacted a historical archive. She submitted the ledger, the letters, the journal, not for revenge, but for record, for memory. One spring morning, she stood in a modest public garden near the edge of the city, watching a new plaque being placed in a corner flower bed. It read, "In honor of the women who were never spoken of, may their names endure." She did not write her own name on it. She didn't need to. Her story had not ended in the mansion. It had begun there. And now it was hers alone to live.